Today, at least for me in Australia, is November the 15th, which marks the 1-year anniversary of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which has become one of the most important Star Wars games of the modern era. Not only did it have to break the stigma of negativity of EA Star Wars games due to the Battlefront 2 launch fiasco, but it had to prove EA wrong in the sense that players are in fact interested in single-player games. Not only did Jedi Fallen Order prove EA wrong to their delight, exceeding their sales and expectations, but it also proved fans wrong that despite all the controversy of recent years, Fallen Order was gaining universally high praise from critics and fans alike. We had an incredible Star Wars video game in the modern era that wasn't going to have to rely on its post-launch content to be a top-tier game. It was, at launch, a complete product, albeit a few bugs were here and there. And because of this, it caught a lot of people off guard, and the word of mouth was immensely positive, and once players completed the game, they came to realize that Jedi Fallen Order was much more than just another Star Wars game telling a rinse and repeat story. Jedi Fallen Order is without a doubt the most important modern Star Wars game when it comes to repairing the damage that the previous two Battlefront installments had left. A lot of people called for the removal of the Star Wars license from EA for years prior to this game's release, but this was the game that turned the tide a little bit and made people realize that things might not be so bad. Having said that, there are still those that would like to see the license expanded to other studios. But if you ask me, I think this game will go down in history as one of the greatest turning points for Star Wars games, and will launch us into an exciting new era of Star Wars games that we will remember for years to come, just like the days of LucasArts in the mid-2000s. So in celebration of Jedi Fallen Order's 1-year anniversary, I'm going to be taking a look back at this incredible Star Wars game from when it was just a thought to where it is now. So let's take it back a few years. Once it was known that there would be a single-player Star Wars game coming from Respawn Entertainment under the EA umbrella, people were met with skepticism for a variety of reasons. It was well known that EA were under the impression that players didn't want single-player games, yet they went ahead with this project despite the cancellation of many other Star Wars games, which included single-player games. Why did this one slip through the cracks of constant game cancellation? What was so special about this Star Wars game? Well, let's go to June of 2018 when Fallen Order was officially announced by Respawn's Vince Zampella in what was one of the most underwhelming game announcements I have ever seen. It was awkward, it was worrying, but there were some interesting details to take away from it. The game's title was announced as Jedi Fallen Order. We would be playing during the Dark Times, which is a super popular era in Star Wars, especially with the rise in popularity of characters like Ahsoka Tano and the Star Wars Rebels TV show. And fans were worried because there was no logo drop, there was no gameplay, no proper teaser. They somehow made the announcement to what turned out to be a Star Wars game worth shouting across the mountains about into a super underwhelming reveal. But it is what it is, and people stayed excited, yet skeptical. Now fast forward a year later to EA Play of 2019, 5 months before the game actually came out, and we finally got our first look at some gameplay. And the responses were mixed. A lot of people were excited, a lot of people weren't. It's kind of funny to go back and read the responses to the gameplay reveal, especially the negative ones, because as we know, the game turned out great. But the demo showed some impressive fight mechanics and gameplay, some alright graphics, and a little bit more on our protagonist Cal Kestis. I think it's fair to say it looked better than most people expected, especially given its underwhelming reveal 1 year prior. But it did get picked apart by some of the biggest gamers on the planet. Now it's fair to assume that Respawn got plenty of fine-tuning done in the months before the game's release, because by the time November 15th rolled around, the game was released to the masses and the positive reception started flooding in from all corners of the internet. People were impressed, critics were impressed, the most anti-EA people there are had to sit back and swallow their own words. And I personally even dubbed it my favorite Star Wars game of all time when I completed it. Jedi Fallen Order truly came from the clouds and delivered something special, something that was unlike anything EA had done with Star Wars before. Fallen Order had a compelling story with interesting characters that were new additions to the Star Wars canon. It didn't rely on playing as a pre-existing character to get you to care. It had some kick-ass lightsaber gameplay with a relatively steep learning curve on higher difficulties, and even though it wasn't open world, the exploration at times felt limitless. Especially on planets like Zepho, which seemed to go on forever. The game starts off with an epic track made just for the game, and it establishes a nice little relationship between Cal Kestis, our main protagonist, and Prof, Cal's friend and workmate. This opening scene played on the nostalgia and heartstrings to help you get on board in the story and its characters. We see Cal brush away the dust on an old Jedi starfighter, unveiling the symbol of the Jedi Order. Combine that with Cal's correction of how many years this starfighter would have been sitting there when Prof mentions what happened to the Jedi. It helps you to get behind Cal as a victim of the events of Revenge of the Sith, and it does make you feel for him. Combine that with the arrival of the game's antagonist shortly after, who turned out to be one of the game's best characters by a mile. The second sister was a real surprise, and the introduction of Seer and Grease, who form Cal's crew for the rest of the game, and you have a perfect introduction to the game that sets it up for greatness. I think a lot of people sort of undervalue just how important this first mission is in terms of setting up this game for success. Now, one of the main things that I think goes a little bit overlooked with Fallen Order is the atmosphere that it creates in its cutscenes. I kid you not, I have actually gone back and watched the cutscene movie of Fallen Order in 4K for this game, and it really makes you appreciate just how well these cutscenes are done. The sound design, the motion capture performances, it all meshes together to create something special. In the final mission of the game, where Cal defeats the second sister and Darth Vader rises out of the smoke in the background as the Anakin's Dark Deeds soundtrack from Revenge of the Sith eases into the scene, is one of the most just memorable moments that really solidified this game as one of my favorites of all time. Seeing the fear on Trilla's face as cinema's most iconic villain slowly comes out of nowhere as that music kicks in, it's moments like this that make Fallen Order not just a great game, but a great contribution to the Star Wars canon, and a really memorable contribution. Now, when it comes to the Star Wars canon, we can't forget characters. Characters like Taron Malicos, who earlier in the game is this strange wanderer on Dathomir, but we find out that he, just like Cal, was a former Jedi who survived the Jedi Purge and escaped to Dathomir, where of course he ended up taking control of the Knight Brothers and turned to the dark side and manipulated Knight Sister Merrin, an also amazing character that this game introduces. Malicos made her believe that it was the Jedi who conducted the Battle of Dathomir and were responsible for the slaughter of her people. But in reality, it was actually General Grievous who did this. This game just has really subtle nuances that bridge the characters from the films to the game, without actually having to bring them there directly just for cheap fan service. I thought the way this game handled Taron Malicos and Night Sister Merrin was honestly just perfect. I think they've done a really great job with those two characters. And it was just another example of why canon storytelling in Star Wars games, it can just be so powerful when it's done right. And the same goes for the second sister, or Trilla Suduri, which is her actual name, and Seer Junda, who we learn were master and apprentice before the Jedi Purge, but Seer eventually cut herself off from the Force after failing Trilla, who then turned to the dark side and became the second sister. All of these characters have direct ties to the Jedi or the downfall of the Jedi, and that's why this game works so well from a character standpoint. Even Cal's old master Jaro Tapal gets lots to do in this story, even though he's dead in the present day. But through flashbacks, we see Order 66 from Cal's point of view as a Padawan and see Jaro Tapal kick some ass. Like, it's great. Respawn honestly just done a great job with this game's story and further deepened the canon of the dark times with Fallen Order. Like, when I compare the canon story of Battlefront 2's campaign to this just leaves Battlefront 2's campaign for dead. Battlefront 2's campaign is such a disposable story that honestly, if it was removed from the canon, I don't think anyone would really care. But it really is great to see in Fallen Order specifically, a video game story that is just a high quality part of the official Star Wars canon, and I really like to see that. But one thing that made Jedi Fallen Order succeed with more hardcore gamers is, of course, the gameplay itself. Lightsaber gameplay hasn't been great since the mid-2000s with games like Jedi Academy, but Fallen Order done the best it possibly could given its limitations. Obviously, the main limitation being no dismemberment of human characters, which for a lot of people is actually a big problem, and I kinda get it. When you fight stormtroopers, it can feel like you're using a glow stick, but dismemberment is fair game against creatures, so lightsabers feel like lightsabers when you're cutting droids in half or big creatures. That's the only real downside to the gameplay, is the no dismemberment thing, but you know, Disney, so you gotta do what you gotta do. This is no fault of Respawn. But apart from that, the way that this game uses its lightsaber combat and force powers is amazing, and so much more in depth to games like Battlefront 2. Force powers range from pushing, pulling, stopping projectiles and sending them back, and you can use a single bladed lightsaber, double or even break your lightsaber into two and dual wield. Which reminds me, going to Ilum and rebuilding your lightsaber with a Kyber crystal was one of the best nods to the Clone Wars TV show that this game has, and the vast variety of enemies, from creatures to trooper variants to bounty hunters, meant you had to approach each fight differently, which kept it fresh. And the way that this game made you progress with force powers was really cool. Cal's connection to the force after the events of the Jedi Purge was of course damaged, and as you progress through the game, you piece his connection to the force back together and have flashback sequences to his training as a Padawan. And that's how you relearn the ability. I just thought that was a much more creative way of having ability upgrades work than, you know, most other games do. And also it's worth mentioning that the boss battles in this game were also a lot of fun. They actually feel like boss battles. They aren't easy unless you're on a potato difficulty, and they get pretty crazy at times too. The final boss battle with Vader was handled perfectly in my opinion. Cal obviously never stood a chance against Vader, and the developers at Respawn wanted to make that known, and the Vader boss battle was just an epic climax to the game. And that was if you didn't get spoiled by the limitless douchebag YouTubers that put the final boss in the thumbnail a day after the game came out. Then you had yourself one hell of a finale to the game. But to bring this all home, I think that Jedi Fallen Order was just the Star Wars game that we needed. The fact that the success of this game went alongside the huge revival of the reinvigorated Battlefront 2, late 2019 really turned things around for Star Wars games, as let's be real, up to that point there were a lot of problems. And everything good that happened just got overshadowed, so Fallen Order is universally considered to be one of the better Star Wars games that we have, although there are some people that are in the minority that think it's terrible because some people just don't like anything. But it is without a doubt one of the best Star Wars games we have that's managed to blend a compelling story that was a worthy contribution to the Star Wars canon, adding great characters that I hope we see more of, as well as new locations like Zepho and Bogano, which I'd love to see on the big screen someday. Blending all of that with modern gameplay that has a steep learning curve that borrows some of the best elements from other video games, and we have a Star Wars game that is going to stand for a lot more than just being a great game. Looking back on it, 1 year from its release, this is just the start of a generation of incredible Star Wars games that I hope rivals the golden period of Star Wars games set in the early to mid 2000s. And because of that, I am really looking forward to seeing what Respawn do with the rumored Fallen Order sequel in the next couple years. But that is going to do it for me today. Be sure to drop a like on this video if you did enjoy it, and subscribe to the channel for more Star Wars gaming content. Star Wars Battlefront and Star Wars Battlefront 2 both have their anniversaries coming up tomorrow and the day after, so I'm going to have videos coming out on both of those days for both of those games, so make sure you've got that notification bell clicked so you know when those videos go live. But that's it for me today, so thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.